Stop believing in conspiracy theories. They are a secret weapon that's meant to make you stupid. You may have seen recent videos of folks like Joe Rogan or former director of National Counterterrorism Center Joe Kent, Candace Owens, Tucker Carlson talking about things that make you go, what? Like, why are they saying this? How did this happen? There's a lot of different things that have led to these different crazy narratives. You're hearing these famous, oftentimes well-regarded people discuss. However, one of the big things I want to tell you about today is conspiracy theories specifically. Now, what do I mean when I say conspiracy theory? All right, a conspiracy theory, because we can call anything a conspiracy theory, that doesn't make it a conspiracy theory. A conspiracy theory is an idea or a narrative that does not have sufficient evidence to support its existence. So let me give you an example first of what's not a conspiracy theory, right? But was called one. All right, so a lot of people said, hey, the COVID disease, which blew up, spread all over the world, came probably from a virology lab in Wuhan, China. Well, that might be a conspiracy theory if there wasn't evidence to support it, but there's tons of evidence. All right, there was a COVID SARS lab in Wuhan, China, right? Just literally miles from where the first evidence of COVID appearing out in the wild occurred. And we know that they were actually working on gain of function work on COVID entities in their lab. All right. We know that there's documents related to that. That's not a conspiracy theory. That's just looking at the data and going, okay, that's probably what it is. So what is an example of a conspiracy theory? Well, let's go with like the 9/11 truther stuff. Okay. So saying generally there's a number of different narratives here. Some of them are just asking questions like, oh, I don't believe the official narrative, which is one way that you'll often see conspiracy theories play out. But very specifically, people will say, oh, 9/11 didn't happen the way they said it did. They rigged the buildings to blow up, and they'll point to these different pieces of information like, say, jet fuel doesn't burn at a temperature hot enough to melt steel. Well, that may be correct, but it does burn at a temperature hot enough to weaken steel. And you couple that with the kinetic energy of large passenger jets crashing into buildings, and there's explosive force, there's actual metal on metal force, there's a whole bunch of different forces here that further weaken the structure, and then you have those billowing fires that ultimately weaken the superstructure leading to collapse. They'll point to Building 7. Why did Building 7 collapse? Well, maybe when 1 million tons, because each tower was around 500,000 tons each, collapses, 1 million tons of steel and concrete and everything else just a few hundred yards away, maybe that can impact the structural integrity of your building. So the core key component I want to get at here is that conspiracy theories are not evidence-based beliefs. So when you start to buy into conspiracy theories, when you entertain them, when you start going down the rabbit hole of asking all the questions, but still not arriving at evidence, and still coming to the conclusions that the conspiracy theorists want you to come to, what you're doing is you're training your mind to believe things that are not true, or at the very least not proven to be true. All right? I never envisioned that conspiracy theories would take off the way they have in the United States. And I say in the United States specifically because conspiracy theories have been a big deal around the world over the years. I mentioned the 9/11 trutherism theories just a moment ago. Well, 20 years ago, when I was in the Marine Corps, I was exposed to different people in the Middle East and from Middle Eastern heritage, a number of different Muslims who were saying things like, oh, we know the Jews were behind 9/11. Now, back then, I knew that's crazy. There's not evidence to base that on. In fact, there's a bunch of evidence to the contrary. We know that it was Al-Qaeda. They took credit for it. They'd been conducting terrorist attacks for years. It matched what they said they were going to do in their TTPs and so on. And there's a whole lot of different things you can look at specifically. There's not evidence that Israel or the Jews were behind 9/11. But why is it that a population in the Middle East might be more susceptible to that belief than what the U.S. at least had been previously? Well, it comes down to our core systems of belief. Islam is a religion that is predicated on beliefs that are not backed by evidence. Okay, there's a lot of different things in the Quran you can look at, and you can look at the end result of what Islam is, and you can say, hey, this isn't really true. Whereas Christianity is a religion that is specifically based on evidence. Take the life of Jesus Christ. There's no historian who rejects no serious historian who rejects that Jesus was a historical person, that he was crucified by the Romans. And in fact, many serious historians who don't even consider themselves Christians would admit that there's tons of legitimate historical evidence that Jesus rose from the dead. Now, they may not still believe it, they may not still understand it, but again, we're talking about something based on evidence because of eyewitness accounts that would work quite well in a court of law. So overall, what I want to reiterate to you here is when you're entertaining conspiracy theories, you're doing things in a way that is more reflective of an Eastern, non-Christian worldview, an Islamic worldview, or possibly other, foreign ancient worldviews that are not evidence-based. The Western way, which is the way of science, which is something that sprung out of Christianity, which sprung out of a culture of Christianity and believing truth based on evidence, rejects conspiracy theories. If more and more Americans continue to play with conspiracy theories, to accept them, to believe them, and so on, we're going to become much, much dumber as a people. And we need to stop doing that. So look around you at the conspiracy theories that maybe you're giving an audience and cut it out. And start calling out folks around you when they start spouting off the same nonsense. Have a great day.